All right, let's dive into a real puzzle today. We're going to explore a paradox that on the surface just doesn't seem to make sense. How is it possible that a nation with one of the most ancient ethical traditions in the world is also seen as one of the most corrupt? Let's get into it. So let's start with a really direct question. This is the exact one that Transparency International uses in their big global corruption studies. Yeah, it's a blunt instrument, for sure, but it's designed to do one thing. Take this big, abstract idea of corruption and make it personal, instantly.
And that question, well, it leads us straight to this fascinating paradox. On one hand, you've got Persia, modern-day Iran, a civilization with these incredibly deep ethical roots. I mean, we're talking about thinkers like Zoroaster, leaders like Cyrus the Great, who wrote one of the world's first ever charters of human rights. But then, on the other hand, you have the hard data. In 2010, Iran was ranked 146th out of 178 countries on the Corruption Perception Index. So what gives? How can a culture so steeped in ethical philosophy be perceived as so corrupt?
To figure this out, we're going to follow the exact path the researchers took. First, we'll look at how you can even begin to measure something as personal as ethics. Then, we'll investigate the usual suspects, all the factors we kind of assume shape our values. After that, we get to the study's big verdict. And finally, we'll look beyond the numbers to really understand what's going on.
Okay, so how in the world do you scientifically measure someone's personal ethics? It sounds impossible, right? But researchers have actually come up with some pretty clever ways to try.
The study that we're diving into here surveyed 448 people, a mix of Iranian citizens, managers, and employees. This gave them a really wide sample of the population to get a true sense of the values people actually hold.
And here's the tool they used to do it. It's called the Personal Business Ethics Scores, or PBES. Now, this survey is smart. It doesn't ask you, hey, do you think your country's corrupt? No. Instead, it gives you a bunch of tricky business dilemmas and asks what you would do. So for example, it might ask if you'd report a coworker for a small mistake or just let it go. And that is such a crucial distinction. It's not measuring how you see the system. It's measuring your own personal ethical compass.
Now for the fun part, the investigation. The researchers wanted to test some of those common assumptions we all have about what makes someone more ethical. So they lined up the usual suspects to see which ones could actually stand up to the data.
First up, age. This is a big one, right? We have this idea that as we get older, we get wiser. But does that really hold true when it comes to making ethical choices?
You know, the common thinking, and even a lot of moral development theories, say that older people should have higher ethical standards. With age comes wisdom. Or does it?
Okay, how about being the boss? Does climbing that corporate ladder and having to manage people actually make your own ethical framework stronger? The assumption here seems pretty solid. When you're responsible for a team, that weight should force you to think more carefully and deeply about what's right and wrong.
All right, what about hitting the books? Does getting a formal education, like a college degree, actually have an impact on a person's moral compass?
Now on this one, a lot of other research is pretty clear. Many studies have found a really powerful link between getting a higher education and having more developed moral reasoning. So this was definitely a key factor to test in Iran.
And finally, what about your employer? Does working in the public sector, with all of its official rules and regulations, make you different from someone working in the private sector?
All right, the suspects are all lined up. We've got age, management experience, education, and working for the government. The researchers crunched the numbers from all 448 surveys. Let's see what the verdict was. And boom, here are the results. And honestly, they're pretty surprising. The factors that turned out to be not statistically significant: age and management experience. That's right. In this study, being older or being a manager had no real impact on a person's personal ethics score. But the things that did make a huge difference were education and having experience working for the government.
So let's just let that sink in. The two things we so often assume build character, just getting older and being a boss, they didn't really matter here. But the two things that involve structured learning and working inside a formal system, getting a degree and working in the public sector, those were directly linked to higher personal ethics scores.
But the study didn't just stop with the numbers. The researchers also gave people a chance to write their own comments, and this is where the story gets even more interesting. For example, one person pointed straight to religion. They said that for them, personal ethics are really rooted in Islamic values and spiritual guidelines. So from their perspective, morality comes from a shared religious framework that guides how you should behave. But then,
you get a comment from another person with a completely different point of view. They argue that the unethical behavior you see in society isn't because people lack personal values. No, they say it's a direct result of the political system. So for them, big systemic problems like a perceived lack of democracy create an environment where bad behavior is almost bound to happen.
And this right here brings us to the very heart of the paradox we started with. This study shows that there's this huge gap between someone's personal values and how they see the world around them. It is totally possible for individuals to have high personal ethical standards, the survey proved that, while at the same time believing that the broader system they live and work in is corrupt. The two things aren't mutually exclusive.
So we're left with this massive question. If people can be personally ethical but operate inside a system they see as broken, then what does a word like corruption truly measure? Is it a reflection of the character of the people, or is it a reflection of the nature of the system they're stuck in? This study suggests the answer is way more complicated than a single number in a ranking could ever tell us.